In today's world, I think it's important that companies that really want to compete in a global environment create a space and an office experience that's really fostering collaboration.
Designers have always known that an open workspace is the best way to kind of foster creativity and collaboration. So we're really embracing this open studio culture. I could go to the CEO's desk and just start up a conversation. There are no barriers.
If you have an open space environment, if you're going to create collaboration spaces, then really the only way to make that happen, especially if you're a global company, is if you make video collaboration part of that puzzle. When we started, we anticipated about maybe 700 calls a month, and since then we've seen about 10,000 calls every month. That translates to about every employee almost every day being on a video call.
Just this morning, I got into the office and I connected with our teammate Johan, who is over in Lausanne. He was able to share his screen, and I was able to really quickly get up to speed with the work that he'd done.
My team actually screens anywhere between 20 to 30 people in any given day. For me, I'm pretty animated when I speak, and so I like to see the person on the other side. I want to see what their reaction is to my questions, to my thoughts. We make decisions that way.
I use video collaboration throughout my entire day, and because I work with different time zones, I have to use it when I go home as well, whether it's in the morning or late at nighttime.
You know, I work from home about 2 or 3 days a week because of that long commute, and it has actually enabled me to have that face-to-face contact with the people that I need to speak with. It's also been a cost-saving feature for us because we don't have to pay for, flights out, because we've actually vetted the candidates out way beforehand before we're actually able to bring them into the office and make that decision to hire.
What I like about the video collaboration tools is the personable aspect of it. That project manager shows me like, okay, this is what we need to update, and they'll literally show me on their model whatever they have, and then I can in turn take that information and show it to my designer.
I think video collaboration is something that has been a key way for us to be successful. Modern companies are all about collaborating and connecting to build great products and services. And so if you want to succeed in today's world, you really need to be able to be agile and innovate dynamically in a very complex environment. We believe video collaboration is an important tool for everybody to be able to operate and be successful, and encourage everybody to adopt this modern technology.
Thank you all for joining our session today, and I hope you really enjoy your Zoomtopia experience so far. So today we are going to share, actually not me, we have two great guest speakers from Logitech. They are CIO, you can go to, yes, they are CIO Massimo Rapparini, and also, hi, and also General Manager Scott Wharton. They are going to share what's the best strategy and practice to build a video-first culture. So now let's give a warm welcome to Scott Wharton.
Thank you. So good morning, everybody. It's great to be here at Zoomtopia. Really exciting, and I think you'd agree they've done a great job of making it not feel like a trade show, right? So I'm just going to introduce a little bit about Logitech, but I'm primarily going to turn it over to Massimo, and he's going to talk to you about how video collaboration fits in with our culture and tell the story of how we've adopted Zoom. So just a little bit about Logitech. I think one thing that's interesting about it is that we're a multi-billion-dollar company, and we have 7,000 employees around the world. But unlike a lot of bigger companies where they have the headquarters that's very centrally located and then a lot of branches, we're really distributed around the world. So we've got most of our management team in California. We've got our headquarters in Switzerland, but most of our employees are in Asia. So we're really very distributed around the world, so it makes communications and collaboration really important to us. And then we're trying to push the envelope on a bunch of different categories in technology. So you probably know about Logitech for mice and keyboards. It's actually still growing, but about less than half of our business now. And then we're a leader in music players with our Ultimate Ears brand, and we've got a $400 million business in gaming. And we have Harmony remote controls for entertainment. And then last but not least, we're a leader in the video collaboration segment with our hardware that works with Zoom. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Massimo, and he's going to share with you more about our journey in video.
Thank you, Scott, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to this session. So I thought I'd start with a short story about video collaboration at Logitech to give you a little bit of the context. So about 3 years ago, before I joined Logitech, I was in another company, And the CEO of that company called me in and said, "You want to meet with me to talk about something really important." So I knew, since I built a good strategic relationship with the CEO, they could only really mean one or two things. Either IT costs had to go down, or his MacBook was broken. Turns out he actually wanted to organize a video call. So that's kind of intriguing. At that time, we only had really one system, one room with a system that had video enabled, which was kind of the high-end boardroom that we used. And it took about half of my IT team to just organize and set up those type of calls. So we went about getting ready. We make sure we confirmed the SIP numbers, we tested the codec, we checked the video connection, we loaded the slides on the computer, we got everything ready to go. And then this is how the call actually went. So somebody pushed the wrong button on the VC console. We had no video. We only had voice. People started dialing into 1-800 numbers. Slides started emailing left and right. Nobody was able to share. And basically, it was kind of a disaster. So the lesson I learned from that is VC really stands for two things: either very complex or forget career, although my spelling needs some corrections as well. But then I came to Logitech, and then Scott actually told me, VC can actually stand for something else, value add CIO. I was a little skeptical, I have to say. But I tried to change and adopt this technology. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of overview of kind of how that happened and what we've done here at Logitech. So as Scott mentioned, Logitech, pretty distributed company. We're about 3,000 employees. The 4 major hubs that Scott mentioned are pretty much in every region. And in terms of our IT footprint, we have about 2,000 servers. 70% of our IT workloads are in the cloud. And we still have some MPLS footprint, but it's reducing constantly. I think back to the culture of Logitech, I think what's important is we have a very open culture. So what does that really mean, and how does it manifest itself? A few ways. I think number one, we have we encourage people really to speak up and be open and communicate really openly. We have a very flat organization. We don't have a lot of hierarchy. And we do want to foster collaboration, right? So as Scott mentioned, as we have a pretty distributed team, we do need to have people across regions work together. So if you look at enterprise collaboration in the context of today, there's an emerging number of technologies that are really trying to fit that need, right? So how do we actually create collaboration platforms for people to work together across regions? So software platforms that really integrate with productivity tools, allow people to be more agile, more productive, are emerging left and right. So you probably yourself may have run into Slack or AI-based type of collaboration, or things that allow you to do a completely wire-free office. So that's the reality of today. And I think video collaboration fits into that really well, right? It's the same type of technology that makes the type of collaboration we're trying to achieve really feasible. So pre-Zoom, just to give you a bit of a picture of Logitech before Zoom, we basically are no different than a lot of the companies that maybe you guys work at, where, I guess the way I would describe it, we're really plagued by what I call the 3 C's of Zoom doom, or let's say of video collaboration doom. And so the first one being, it's very complex to set up, right? So if you don't have the right technology, complexity is number one. Number 2, it's confusing to use, right? So it's very difficult for users to actually apply technology and use the video collaboration tools. And the third piece is obviously cost. Very costly to operate and manage, and doesn't actually lend itself well to actually make video collaboration the standard for everybody. So if you look at basically what happened at Logitech after kind of initial usage of video collaboration, we acquired a company called Lifesize, so we actually started deploying video collaboration more widely, right? So in more places. But still, really, the cost of something like the MPLS and the complexity didn't really get reduced significantly. So pre-Zoom, the story wasn't really pretty, right? And video collaboration as a standard technology was not really something that we were doing at Logitech. So what were the pain points we were hoping to address with Zoom? Well, basically, really the ability to make video usage something that's ubiquitous and everybody can do every day in their life. And addressing the things I talked about, the complexity, the cost, and the confusion and ease of use. With Zoom, I think what we found is the ease of use is really powerful, and people actually are able to quickly use the video collaboration platform without a lot of kind of hassles to go through or steps to go through and really make it somewhat seamless. So that's been really the basis for us to address video collaboration and looking at Zoom and evaluate that platform as something for us to move forward on. So back to our legacy video environment, we were really in a situation where there was a mix of different things. We had a hybrid technology in place. We used things like, for instance, WebEx or Global Crossings for different type of communication and collaboration. And really what we were looking for was something that would allow us to step over all of these issues and get to something much more simple and more integrated in terms of what we could do with video collaboration. If you look at the goal in terms of video collaboration, really we were expecting something that would allow people in any region at any time, whether they were remote or actually in the office or any site, to be able to actually use the technology to their advantage. And so we decided to do an evaluation and look at Zoom, and I'll explain a little bit more how we came to the conclusion that Zoom was the right fit for us. So why Zoom? Well, I think the expectation in terms of what people are requiring these days is kind of the same as what they have at home, right? Just like you're able to quickly connect with your family with a Skype call or what have you, there's really an expectation that you can do the same in your work environment. Zoom for us checked a lot of boxes in terms of business objectives that we wanted to reach. But if I even ask, kind of casually people in the room, sometimes what's really so compelling about Zoom, I think the main theme is just the ease of use, right? The kind of seamless way of being able to actually start video conferencing and work across the different regions. The specific, let's say, business objectives that we try to address, the ones that are listed here. So looking at communication budget, the things that we were using, making that more a consolidated solution instead of having 6 or 7 different solutions. Really allowing the culture of open collaboration across the regions and people working remotely to be a reality, right? So not something that you could only do on a big kind of VC equipment kind of setup, but on a mobile device, on your desktop, being able to do it really with easy deployment, with incremental new features that people can leverage as the platform evolves. Obviously, cloud-based is important. Like I mentioned, at Logitech, we are very heavily cloud set up, or cloud-focused. It's not just a kind of a buzzword, right? Yeah, cloud, everybody's trying to do it. But really the overhead in terms of managing an infrastructure just to run video has been really the important factor for us to be able to actually offload all of that and not really need to worry about it. At the end of the day, really the end result and the real criteria for us was able to get better support at a lower cost and really a simpler user experience for our users. And SCORE, I think, is the right way we describe it, right? Zoom pretty much made that happen. So let's look a bit at our deployment. Obviously, since we have some products that we can use within our 4 walls, we have deployed heavily those products. We do power about 300 meeting rooms, which is pretty much all our rooms at Logitech with Zoom. I think in the video with the funny guy that was in the video before, he was talking about 10,000 Zoom calls or Zoom meetings a month. Since then, I think the video was about 3 or 4 months ago. It's now 15,000 a month that we run at Logitech. And that isn't necessarily the pace of growth of our employee population. It's really been the adoption and the usage. We also use, obviously, heavily toll-free calling with Zoom and a bunch of other features. And I think it's really compelling to see how easily the platform can be used by everybody if you look at some of these numbers. In terms of our own product deployment, can do a little bit of a deep down if you look at the type of meeting rooms and setups that we have in our 4 walls. A lot of our meeting spaces are more the kind of medium to large meeting rooms. And so it makes sense for us to deploy what we call our group product and solution, which allows us to really also do extension mics and be able to cover basically larger spaces for collaboration. But good second in terms of product deployment is Meetup, which is a product that we launched recently that has integrated speakers and cameras, and is really perfect scenario for huddle rooms, right? So I think a lot of the office spaces that people are trying to get into these days allow for more frequent huddles and people working together in closer teams. And so Meetup is a great solution for us, and we've seen a huge take-up in that as well in terms of usage across our employees. And then the last one I would mention is Logitech Brio. So this is a webcam, which is our traditional Logitech business, but not your standard webcam. It's really our high-end 4K webcam, and I'm not trying to give a plug to Logitech here, a little bit maybe. But the one thing I would specifically call out is the fact that it has really advanced features from a software point of view, where things like background replacement are very practical, right? So everybody talks about having remote workers and people working from home, and I'm sure you've seen videos of, your 2-year-old son or a dog making a unplanned guest appearance in the background of your video call with your manager. And I think things like background replacement are a great way to make it a little bit more professional. So anyway, so that's not just within the office context, but also in the context of remote workers and people working from home. I love this chart because I think it gives you a great picture of, so what is our Zoom usage actually at Logitech, right? And the lines basically indicate the connections between our over 75 sites that are actually getting together or having calls over Zoom every day, right? So this is a monthly snapshot. The size of the blue bubbles that you can see is basically the volume of calls in a specific site to and from that site that happen on a monthly basis. And the thickness of the lines, also it's a little difficult to see, is basically the amount of calls between two specific sites. No matter how you look at this, I think you can see it speaks kind of for itself that if there's any question about adoption of Zoom, it should probably be gone by now. It's not just a solution that gets used intensively, but it's also something that we actually really make part of people's everyday life at Logitech in the way that they communicate together. A few more data points. I think interesting, I was talking to other customers here at Zoomtopia that were talking about their usage. In our case, we've seen on average, the median call duration is about 30 minutes. So I think we've deployed the technology in a way that people quickly get together. We have about, on average, I think 2 to 3 people in a meeting on average in these calls. And I think it's a great way to demonstrate it's become a natural way of people communicating instead of maybe picking up the phone. So a question I do get, or I guess more of a concern, often from other leaders of IT is, well, it all sounds great. And I've heard a lot of great stuff about Zoom, but how does it help me in terms of just the proliferation of stuff, right? So, hey, we already use Hangouts, so we have this other tool. People in engineering like Slack, it has a video feature. Now we're adding more stuff, right? And I think for us, the answer has been, well, it actually can help you displace other things and other technology. And I think it does show a migration in terms of how people work together from, I guess, the traditional way of communicating one-to-one or one-to-many to something like Zoom. So if you've seen our growth, it's about 75% increase in weekly calls. This is Zoom video calls. And it's clearly started to become the standard in terms of how people actually communicate. Like I said, not just formal meetings, but even just one-to-one communication. In effect, also decreasing the usage of things like VoIP or local carrier type of solutions, desktop solutions that people may be using before to actually be able to communicate one-to-one. So yes, for me, the answer is yes, proliferation of tools is not necessarily completely going to go away, but there's definitely a reduction in other ways that people communicate if you implement Zoom. So, creating the collaborative culture, having the right Logitech video equipment in place is really going to be helpful in terms of making Zoom work well. But jokes aside, I think the other piece that we've noticed is that you do also, equally important, is to put the right support in place and the education for people using video collaboration to really make that successful and have the adoption grow, right? And an example of some of the things that our IT team did, and I have a few representatives here if you guys want to talk to them later, is number one, provide kind of reference cards in every meeting room, right? It's really important that if you're trying to set up a meeting, there's really very few obstacles. It's pretty self-explanatory. You can quickly just stand up the call instead of what I was describing I was doing 3 years ago trying to run a video call, right? So reference cards really make it easy for people to get help. So we implemented shortcuts in the meeting room displays for people to quickly get help and contact somebody in IT to help them actually run a call. Or, for instance, deploying plugins, which we did. We deployed plugins in people's desktop calendars such that they could send out invites that by standard, by default, would have a Zoom invite built into it, right? So those are all things that at the end of the day make it something that people don't really have to think about. But as part of how they actually do their workflow, they can use Zoom any time of the day. So there's a few things that I wanted to share that are hopefully, I guess, specific observations we had from our Zoom deployment, and that I'm hoping would be important or relevant to you guys as well. One use case in particular that we found very compelling is when it comes to M&A enablement. So Logitech hasn't been doing a lot of M&A, but in the last year we've done 2 Jaybird earbuds that you guys maybe saw in the previous slides before, and Astro Gaming, which we just concluded, which is a gaming company. And what we found is we really made it a practice to video enable any acquired company within 30 days of the transaction. And why is it important? Well, I think the main benefit that we saw is the fact that you immediately create a very strong channel for communication between the 2 companies. It's much more powerful to actually see people in person. Sometimes they're in a different geography, and you can actually communicate really almost face-to-face. But it also creates a real collaboration platform, right? So just sharing content, being able to connect in a meeting, and doing things really much more rapidly than what we saw before. And in effect, creating a bigger chance of success in terms of the transaction than if you just basically keep the companies virtually separated. So I think that's a great compelling use case, and maybe one that doesn't come immediately to mind, but I would say don't underestimate the power of implementing Zoom for those type of things as well. So a couple of, I guess, takeaways and lessons learned that I wanted to share before we switch over to Q&A. So the first one is simplicity, right? So I think we saw a picture earlier on about kind of a legacy environment where you got cabling everywhere, you have 3 different devices to start the call and so on. So the more complexity you build into the video experience, the lower the chances of getting that kind of adoption, right? So my recommendation to everybody would be relentlessly focus on simplifying the experience. So make it easy for people, remove a number of steps for people to actually start video calls, get on video calls, run, display, share, whatever they want to do, such that it becomes kind of a no-brainer to actually use it. But also physically, right? Physically think about the room experience, right? And we've seen that as a big important factor, that if the way you actually look at people is kind of off balance, or there's like 3 cables you're going to trip over before you can actually share your screen, it really makes the experience a little bit more repulsive, I guess, than if it's something that's simpler. So think about removing cables, or using HDMI in a room where you actually want to be able to share also without being connected to the internet. So there's all these small things that really, at the end of the day, are also all about picking the right setup for the right type of environment and meeting. So that, I think, is key takeaway, and I think really helps in terms of overall the video adoption. And then the second piece was really make network effects work for you. It is 100% much more valuable to actually have video collaboration deployed at scale in your environment than if you only have a very kind of isolated silo or islands of pockets of video usage across the company, right? It's kind of the network law where the more nodes we add, the exponential kind of the value in terms of that solution. And I think we've seen that really as a way that has grown our adoption, has grown kind of the value that people have extracted from the implementation that we've done. So I guess kind of in closing, my message to all of you would be really foster employee collaboration and create the video collaboration environment to make it something that your people adopt in the company. Why? Because I think if you're going to really try to have an open and collaborative environment, it's really a must. It's a requirement. And if you're serious, I think, about innovation, what we saw in the video about what we described Logitech is about, if you're serious about people being able to work in a very fragmented and geographically distributed environment, then really it's the only way to make this successful. And I think, to quote my good friend Scott, in terms of how video can actually be much more compelling than potentially even being live, video can actually be a better experience than being in person in the meeting. And all the things that you are able to do with video collaboration make for that experience to be something that can be really successful. So that's pretty much my summary and view in terms of Logitech and the way we've actually adopted video collaboration. I hope it's something that inspires you to also look at ways to do that. And unless you have already plenty of mice and keyboards and don't need to talk about Logitech products anymore, I would suggest definitely reach out to us about also some of the things that we've implemented in terms of those video solutions as well. And with that, I'll turn it back to Scott.
Great. Yeah, I think we're done, other than just saying that we have a booth here if you want to check out our stuff. And obviously, we're here to talk more about you. And we've got some prizes we're going to give away, and we're sponsored this evening. So we're appreciated to the opportunity to be here, and love to take some questions. Probably most of them from Massimo, but also here as well. Take some as well.
One, there we go. Question on rollout and the culture adoption. Was there a formulation? Was this a bottom-up approach or a top-down approach? What was the adoption factors, and was the adoption incentivized at all for the participants?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think the culture is definitely important, and not necessarily something you could just say, hey guys, starting from tomorrow, let's all be open and collaborative, right? So that culture, I think, grew, and at the same time, we actually saw the video collaboration implementation as a way to not just accelerate it, but also support it, right? And so, yes, Logitech went through a transformation in the last 4 years, going from just kind of a devices, hardware company to more of a design company, right? Which is what also Scott was referring to. And to do that, video really kind of both fit into that. It was almost kind of a prerequisite to make that happen. So to answer your question, it was a little bit of a top-down, as in with a new management team and a new vision in terms of Logitech strategy. We've really defined and articulated the need to be more open and collaborative. But then really bottoms up, we had to actually put the things in place that would make that happen, right? And that's how video fit in. That I guess is kind of the best way to describe it. I don't know if you have an additional.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that, it wasn't just implementing Zoom. We also reorganized the way people were sitting. So I think about 4 or 5 years ago, people were sitting in more of a traditional office space, and we moved to completely open offices where we just got obliterated all of the offices, all the way up to the CEO, where everyone's sitting out in an open environment. But then instead of just putting everyone in an open environment, we put a lot of huddle rooms out there. And I think we also had a philosophy that instead of putting video in a selective set of rooms that people might use video, we just, as Massimo said, we just put them in every single room. Because if someone walks into a room and then they realize, all right, it's booked, and then I have to go to the next one, or they don't have the equipment, then people just get frustrated. So given the cost of the equipment and the service, we just felt it would be better to put it everywhere. And I think that has a big impact on people using it, because everybody knows that the video is always going to be available no matter what. It's not like I have to book a place. There's enough space to just use it on an ad hoc basis.
So does the culture always have to utilize what is the hardware, or is it on every device?
It's on every device.
So they can
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, and I think also 100% of our meetings are Zoom, so people don't start with the idea that they're audio. It's Zoom as the default.
Yes.
And as Massimo said, it's in the calendaring, so whenever you send out a meeting, the assumption is that it's always going to be video, and you rarely have anyone on audio anymore. So the stat up there was 81% of people were on video. I bet we're actually higher. I would bet we're closer to 90 or even higher people that are on video on the calls.
Is there any policy behind that? Does the organization create a policy expressing that video is the preferred method?
I don't think we did a formal policy, let's say kind of deployment, right? I think, like I said, we created really the conditions for it to be, by default, really what you want to do or be able to do.
And I think it was interesting that the shift was when we had the life-size equipment internally, that people use video, but they didn't use it as much. When it moved to Zoom, it just started coming the bottom up, where people actually wanted to use it because it was easier to use. So I think it wasn't imposed at all. I think it's just something that people actually started to like. I think the other thing that we see overall, just being in the video business, is that you don't have these in-between states where half the people use video and half don't. Either you're a non-video culture. I mean, kind of the examples, if you're on a call and there are 8 people on it and 7 are on audio and 1 are on video, you look at that one guy in the video and go, hey, shut your video off, you weirdo. Like, why are you the only one on there? Whereas the opposite starts happening. You have 6 or 7 people on video and then you have 2 people on audio. Yeah, it also seems unfair, right? So you say to them, hey, you, turn your video on. So I think what we found is that in most cases, there is no in-between. It's either all or nothing, and it kind of moves to 100% video. I think it's hard to explain that to people who are audio only, but we've seen it happen all over the world where it just goes fast.
Yep.
Because of peer pressure, not because of a top-down policy.
A couple of questions there.
I have a question on like your mobile workforce. It sounds like you're mostly in an office environment. Do you have like a mobile sales force that had like trouble adopting this? In my company, we're a large logistics company.
Yep.
So we have a massive like mobile sales force, engineering teams that go into warehouses. Do you have any examples or like best practices for mobile?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so yes, I mean, obviously we are a formal organization with office spaces and major hubs like we talked about where we actually have people in an office. But at the same time, it doesn't exclude the fact we also have I would say at least on the sales side, maybe 300-400 also global employees that are really very mobile, right, and very distributed in terms of locations, as well as other use cases where we have mobile people that are, because of the special skills that they have or whatever, have actually a remote working location. So yes, to answer your question, we do address that as well, and I think we found, and that's what I was referring to earlier, that really Zoom stood out because it allows us to do that, both whether you're on your mobile device just because you're running late from soccer game and going to somewhere else, or you're actually a remote worker. And both of these solutions or these scenarios actually work, whether it's on premise or as a remote worker. I don't think I know off the top of my head some stats, but I would say for sure at least a quarter or maybe a third of a lot of our participants are remote workers as well.
Yeah, I'd say also just to add to that, we're really strong in favor of having people work from home occasionally. So for example, our office is in the East Bay, but we have quite a few people who live in San Francisco, and their commute can be an hour and a half. So that's not an example of people working in another city. It's just literally being in the same city. So what we've done is in order to retain employees, we've actually said, all right, come into the office 2 days a week and then work from home 3 days a week, roughly. And I think that actually is a great retention tool, because if people had to commute an hour and a half each way a day, they would probably quit. So the fact that we're flexible, I think, allows us to retain them. But I think the way it works is that we insist that if you're working from home, no being on audio and doing your laundry and then saying, I'm sorry, what did you say? I missed it. Like, you got to be on Zoom, you have to be on video. And I think because everybody does it, it works. Like, it allows people to be flexible and be wherever they need to be. Because I think if people are just working from home and they're on audio, it doesn't work. In fact, in 2 weeks from now, and you probably didn't hear this, but it's National Work From Home Week. It's a thing, apparently. So we're going to do, along with Zoom and LinkedIn and a few other companies, we're going to do an experiment where we're going to encourage every single employee, the thousands at Logitech, to all work from home for a day on Tuesday. And we'll see how it goes. I think there are a few people who probably can't do that, like the security people in the office, but we're going to try to have almost everybody do it. I would say we absolutely couldn't do it without Zoom as our backbone and people buying into it. And I think part of what we're going to do with Zoom is use it as an experiment, see what works, see what doesn't work, and then we'll go out and do some PR and kind of share our story about it. So if you guys want to do it, it's in 2 weeks. I think it's on October 8th or something on a Tuesday. Come see us. We'd love you to participate in the experiment.
Is there a question?
Is it possible to do 2 cameras in one meeting? For example, you're up front teaching, you've got this camera up here recording the meeting.
Yep.
And also another camera at the front showing the audience.
Yep.
How does that happen?
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, so the question is, can you do multiple cameras in a meeting, right? And like an example, in a teaching environment, you want to show the content and maybe the teacher or the students. So not only, I guess, in a teaching environment. I think we've looked at that within our environment as well, right? Because I think you're right, in some of the rooms, just to set up the ability to actually look at a screen or a whiteboard what somebody's writing on and then actually look at the audience. So yes, the answer to your question is we've started experimenting with that in different setups. I think you do need to figure out what's the right balance in terms of people getting a little lost as to what are we looking at, and kind of how to make the experience somehow lean and consistent. But it can be done, and I think it's something we want to explore more. I know Scott will probably talk about even products on our side that we want to do where you have multiple cameras. It's just pretty much immersing people in the experience. So it's much more immersive if you actually have multiple angles, like in a real experiment.
Yeah, we had a funny story recently where one of our customers was saying, hey, I want to be able to have a camera and hang it upside down to be able to show the presenter like the gentleman's talking about. And we said, well, from a product point of view, we don't support that. And they said, what do you mean? We're already doing it. And what we realized is that they were actually using Zoom to kind of flip the image. So they were hanging it upside down and flipping an image in Zoom. So we didn't build our cameras to support that, but luckily through the relationship we have with Zoom, we're able to do that. Mm-hmm. So we see a lot of people in classrooms, just like you're saying, where people want to see the presenter and have one at the front of the TV as well.
So it sounds like you have a mix of individual Zoom accounts in addition to Zoom Room accounts. Is that correct?
Yeah, and our adoption of Zoom Room is pretty limited because mostly, and which is maybe a question to this audience too, we've seen people as they get into meeting rooms, often it's not just Zoom that they want to do, right? So in some cases, they also want to be able to, I don't know, go out the internet or actually launch some other tool or software. And so what we've deployed is what we call our group camera with a Nook, kind of mini computer that really allows us to, through quick launch, create kind of a launching pad, right? Like a console for people to launch, whether it's also third party that asks them to join a WebEx call or whatever, that they can actually choose and pick. And like I said, by default, Zoom is the one that they will use. But that's the way we've done it. We've done a few Zoom rooms where the only use case is just using Zoom, right? Like a board type of meeting or those kind of things.
But we do have all of the end users have their own individual Zoom account.
Yes.
And
yes.
Yeah, I think what's interesting too is that we do have this mix of usage, but people will use it on their desktop as well. But since we have all these breakout rooms, I think you find a lot of people going into conference rooms rather than everybody sitting at their desk. One thing that we didn't mention is that I was surprised when I started at Logitech 2 years ago that we had no phone system. There's no PBX, no telephones. And I was surprised because I'd seen or heard about that for smaller companies, but being a relatively large company, I wasn't sure how it was going to work. But I don't think anybody really misses the phone system, partly because the default is more collaboration with more than one person where you're doing Zoom. And if you need to make a phone call, you use your mobile phone, but most of our communication is not on a PBX because we don't have a PBX or even a cloud PBX. It's really all in Zoom. So we're using it for that too, which I don't think we really talked about, but I think it's an important part of our deployment. So if people say you can't do it or people won't give up phones, I would tell them that we do it. I don't think anybody really misses a telephone.
Yep. There's another question there.
Yeah, we're a remote company and use 100% Zoom for all interaction. We spend a lot of time trying to optimize that, and we're quite happy to invest it, but we're always unsure about the interaction between the camera, the graphics processor, the bandwidth, and Zoom, and which of the components in the chain interact with each other in order to create the net effect. And we're also, very curious in, HD, 4K, like what we can use. It's quite confusing. Like even here, we got different answers between the Zoom person and Logitech person around which camera we should use.
As long as it's Logitech.
So could you just maybe explain for someone that's really looking to invest in the optimization of that full chain? First, what's your proposed optimal solution?
Yep.
And maybe even just give a little education around the interaction between those different components and the degree that we should be investing in each of the different things on that technology layer.
No, I mean, it's a great question, and probably will take more than the 2 minutes I think we will allocate to you. But on a serious note, I think you're right, and I think that's the reality of my team, and you can definitely talk to some of the guys here later on about how much we still also invest in terms of trying to make that experience seamless, right? Because there are still a few things that interact, right? And you need to get right, whether it's the camera, whether it's the network connection, it's the connection to the actual device or whatever you have. So I think one of the things that we've created as a practice is ongoing working, and we have a little bit the luxury of having Scott and his team as our partners, ongoing management of things that we notice and we get from our end users in terms of feedback, and kind of really trying to peel the onion and figure out, so with Zoom, and I think Zoom has been pretty responsive, to also figure out, is the interaction with their product with ours that isn't working, or there's something in terms of lag that we need to fix on our infrastructure. But because I guess systematically trying to address each of the pieces is definitely kind of a practice. But I do think it's a lot less, let's say, heavy duty than when you have a real infrastructure that you're running yourself, right? Because bottom line is Zoom does a lot of the optimization on their end. I think we continue to improve our firmware and software that goes on the devices to ensure it actually interacts well with Zoom, and that's where we partner with them as well. And then from an IT infrastructure, we make sure that at least from an overall connectivity conditions, whether it's Wi-Fi, the coverage, that doesn't become a factor, right? But yeah, no, I guess beating about the bush. It's a constant, I think, focus on trying to make that experience optimized. And I would suggest for sure maybe talk to some of the guys here if you want to look at some of the things that we went through.
Yeah, I guess I would say you need enough bandwidth. If you don't have enough bandwidth, nothing matters because it just doesn't work, right? So I think that's preeminent. And then I would say that, the audio almost, I think everybody knows this inherently, the audio comes before the video, because if the audio doesn't work, you can't have a conversation. So we spend a lot of time on the acoustics of rooms and then making sure that you don't go cheap on audio equipment in the room. I think some people want to put in like the cheapest audio I've seen, and or why are you doing that? You're saving no money. So that's important. And then things like lighting can be a big problem, right? So just making sure that you don't have sunlight coming in at the heat of the day. And then I think the one thing that we've learned too across the board is having the right solution for the right room. So sometimes people, part of what we've tried to do is really say, there are certain rooms that are huddle rooms that you can't see the people at front, so you need a certain solution there. And then, as Massimo said, sometimes you just have a small telephone booth. You don't need a massive system. You could do a webcam in that room. But then for the bigger rooms, you're going to need things that can go more narrow as opposed to broad and have better audio pickup for a larger room. And if you have something that's not designed for that, then people can't hear each other. So try to have a lot of focus about...
Look at the use case, right?
Yeah, and even the auditoriums. For those, you need a special kind of audio. Otherwise, you can't hear people. It won't work. So a lot of it is designing the solution for each particular room rather than a one-size-fits-all.